As we discussed in the previous sessions, the first steps that we take when we deal with site contamination and soil remediation is conducting environmental site assessment. There are two preliminary steps that must be taken usually. They're called phase 1 environmental site assessment and phase 2 environmental site assessment. Basically, when we do phase 1 environmental site assessment, one of the objectives, as we explained, was to understand if we need to conduct phase 2 environmental site assessment. We did site assessment. We didn't discuss that when that phase 2 is required. And here we want to discuss the conditions under which we sort of are obliged to go ahead with conducting phase 2 environmental site assessment. So there are certain conditions that will sort of force us to do phase 2 environmental site assessment. So phase 2 environmental site assessment is usually required when either of these conditions that are listed in this page 27 of your handouts are actually exist. The first condition is if the property that you are conducting the site assessment for potentially containing, if there is a potentially containing contaminating activity is identified. So what is the potentially contaminating activity? There is actually a list. There's a list in the following pages that we will go through the list. There are certain activities that if you identify any of those activities on the land and on the property, you should you're pretty much you're kind of forced to do phase 2 environmental site assessment. We'll talk about those contaminating activities. Another condition is if the property is used or has ever been used in whole or part for an industrial use. For example, if it was used for machine shopping or as a machine shop or as a garage or as a manufacturing plant. So any sort of industrial use, if it has been happening, usually we need to do phase 2 environmental site assessment. The reason for that is, we'll discuss later as well, that most of the times that you have industrial use, you will have fuel tanks, you'll have generators, you'll have use of oil and grease. So that's why you may have to do, you have some sort of contamination. Or if the property has been used for any of the following commercial uses: as a garage, as a bulk liquid dispensing facility, including a gasoline outlet, it's pretty obvious, or for the operation of dry cleaning equipment. That's another type of activity that will result in a requirement of phase 2 environmental site assessment. Okay, let's go through the details of all of these conditions. The first one was contaminating activities. Potentially contaminating activities, there's a list there's a definition for potentially contaminating activities. The potentially contaminating activities means a use or activity set out in column A of table 2 of schedule D. This is actually in Ontario's Environmental Act, which is very similar to what we have as requirements in Manitoba. Is occurring or has occurred in a phase 1 study area. So if any of the activities that you will see in the following pages has been happening in is occurring or has occurred in the land, you will need to do phase 2 environmental site assessment. These activities are listed in the following pages. We'll go through them quickly. You will have them in page 29 through 32, and you can actually see all of these activities. They're pretty much kind of includes almost every type of manufacturing and industrial use. Examples are, for example, if you have any acid or alkali manufacturing, processing, or bulk storage. right? If you have any adhesive or resins manufacturing, processing, bulk storage, if you have any airstrips and hangers operation, right? So the icing manufacturing or antifreeze or the icing manufacturing, if you have any asphalt or concrete manufacturing, battery manufacturing is another example, boat manufacturing, chemical manufacturing, processing and bulk storage. If you have any coal gasification, basically getting coal and do the process of gasification. Commercial auto body shops, pretty obvious. Commercial trucking and container terminals. That's another activity that if you see on your land, you will have to do environmental site assessment, phase 2 environmental site assessment. Concrete cement line manufacturing, cosmetic manufacturing, crude oil refining. This is very obvious. You most likely have some sort of contamination, discharge or brine related to oil and gas production. That's another type of activity. Other activities, number 16 in your list, drum and barrel and tank reconditioning and recycling. Why? Because either of those tanks or containers might actually have residuals of gasoline, fuel, or any or other contaminating products. Dye manufacturing, processing and bulk storage, electricity generation, transformation and power stations. Electronics and computer equipment manufacturing, explosive and ammunition manufacturing, production and bulk storage, explosives and firing range. That's also another activity. Fertilizer manufacturing. This is not agriculture, it's like fertilizer manufacturing. Fire retardants manufacturing, processing and bulk storage. Fire training. Flocculants manufacturing, processing and bulk storage. Flocculants, we know that they're used in water wastewater treatment for removing residuals. You will see them in your next year's wastewater treatment course. Foam and expanded foam manufacturing and processing. Garages and maintenance and repairs of rail cars, marine vehicles and aviation vehicles. These are also another type of activities. Gasoline and associated products storage in fixed tanks. Glass manufacturing, importation of fill materials of unknown quality. That's also important because fill materials, they might come from places from they might have been excavated from the areas that have already been contaminated. So you have to, if you don't know what is the quality or what is the source of the fill material, you have to always conduct phase 2 environmental site assessment. The list goes on. Ink manufacturing, processing, bulk storage, iron steel manufacturing and processing, metal treatment, coating, plating and finishing, metal fabrication, mining, smelting and refining, ore processing, tailing storage. You can have that in mines in Manitoba. We have quite a bit of them in northern Manitoba. Oil production, operation of dry cleaning equipment, right, when the chemicals are used. Ordnance use, if you have paint manufacturing, pesticides manufacturing. Again, this is not part of the agriculture directly, but the manufacturing, processing, bulk storage and large scale applications. Petroleum derived gas refining, manufacturing, processing and bulk storage. Pharmaceutical manufacturing and processing, because they're involved with lots of chemical use. Plastics manufacturing and processing. Port activities, including operation and maintenance of wharves and docks. This is the reason for listing this activity under this the column A is because whenever you have a port and dock, you most likely have fuel storage and you most likely have a spill of fuel or gas or grease and oil. So that's also important to that's why it's important to conduct phase 2 environmental site assessment. And the list also includes pulp and paper and paperboard manufacturing and processing, rail yards, trucks and spurs, rubber manufacturing and processing, salt manufacturing, processing, bulk storage, salvage yards, including automobile wrecking, obviously, because of the obvious reasons. You have lots of hazardous materials as well as fuel. Soap and detergent manufacturing, processing, bulk storage, number 50. Number 51, solvent manufacturing, processing and bulk storage, storage, maintenance, fueling and repair of equipment, vehicles and material used to maintain transportation systems. Tannery is another business or industry that requires phase 2 environmental site assessment. Textile manufacturing and processing, transformer manufacturing, processing and use, treatment of sewage equal to or greater than 10,000 liters per day. This is very important to note that sometimes we may have sewage, but we may have a small septic tank that is upper ground and is less than 10,000 liters per day, so we may not have to do any phase 2 environmental site assessment because sewage because it's just a lower volume than required. Number 57, vehicles and associated parts manufacturing, waste disposal and waste management. This is very obvious. Whenever you have a landfill, you have transfer stations for waste management, or you have any recycling facility, you will need to do phase 2 environmental site assessment. And also wood treating and preservative facility and bulk storage of treated and preserved wood products. That's another activity. These activities, as you see, these are listed under column A, Schedule D, the Ontario Environmental Act. So this is again, the list is very similar and it is useful also in Manitoba. If any of these activities have been happening in the past or they are happening now on the property, and if you're going to assess the site, you will have to conduct phase 2 environmental site assessment, and we will discuss what do we do in phase 2 environmental site assessment. There are certain objectives that we will actually have in phase 2 environmental site assessments, and we will discuss those objectives, and we will discuss the processes that are involved that we need to follow in phase 2 environmental site assessment. And we will discuss those details in the next session.